Yeah, thanks for being there.
Letting the press in, I know there's.
There you go.
Good thing to share in is somebody else's success, right?
See you later. Have a good day.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll see you.
Thank you. Bye. It's always good. I don't know if I ever heard about it.
It was really nice because he had had that procedure the day before we left. We did not. I wouldn't let him
Recording in progress.
and so, which normally I would hate, but forced relaxation.
Where's everybody?
Want to come sit with me?
I like it.
We're in open session.
With you?
Have activities.
We did activities every day, but
Oh, it was just on the board?
I don't trust him.
Oh, yeah. His own vein. That from that.
He would.
Yeah. Yeah. We're at 4 o'clock. So
Yeah, we're good to go, Chair.
I guess as soon as the recording starts.
It started.
Yes, okay. Welcome to the April 29th Regional Board meeting. I want to recognize that we're holding the meeting on the traditional territory of the Tla'amin Nation. We have an agenda in front of us. Somebody like to move the agenda? I don't know of any changes. Director Gisborne, thank you very much. Director Lennox. Dr. Southcott.
Oh, second.
Oh, Director Lennox did the second. I thought you were doing the third or something like that.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm behind. I'm not even on video.
It's okay. All in favor? And none opposed, motion carries. Adoption of the minutes. Are there any errors or omissions? April 8th, 2025. Seeing no hands, somebody like to move that? Director Gisborne, thank you very much. Director Southcott, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, motion carries. Oh, Mr. Vanderhorst. You online with us here today?
Yes.
There he is. Welcome back. We just, for those of you who weren't watching the earlier regional hospital district meeting, we had Mr. Vanderhorst in there to explain the financial statements for that body. Welcome to the regional district board. Where's yours?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Get my screen going here. There we go. So thank you again to the board. Nice to see you again. And I have a short presentation to give you for the financial statements for the qathet Regional District. Take you through some of the highlights of the financial statements, a little bit about the audit and the audit process, and then I'd be happy to answer questions at the end. So diving right in to the numbers. For the year ending at the end of December 2024, you can see there the regional district has cash and investments of just over $24 million. If you add in the receivables and other financial assets, you get a total there of $57.5 million at the end of 2024. The regional district debt has increased to just about $14.7 million. And then regional district debt, the member municipality debt, and other payables and liabilities are on the books at $59.1 million. So you can see you're into what we call a net debt position, more liabilities than financial assets at the end of 2024. That frequently occurs in periods where new debt is being taken on. So $1.5 million of net debt at the end of the year, as opposed to the prior year, which had a $300,000 net financial asset position. Tangible capital assets being managed by the regional district. So that's, equipment, infrastructure, buildings, things like that are $45.3 million. So there is some significant increase year over year in the Resource Recovery Center and Waste Transfer Station, as well as some other projects. And then at the end of the year, an accumulated surplus balance of $44 million. I will show you in a future slide what's in that $44 million. On the income statement side, at a very high level, the statement of operations, total funding for the year of $18.8 million. It is down from the prior year. 2023 had a couple significant grants from the province that came through the Growing Communities Fund, and those funds didn't come through again in 2024. They were a one-time grant from the province, so that decrease in revenue for the year is not unexpected. Total expenses have increased through inflation from $12.7 to $14.6 million, but important to note that is under budget. Budget expenses were 16.5, and you're almost $2 million under that budgeted amount, so that is a positive. And an accounting surplus at the end of the year of $4,140,000, a little bit up from the prior year, a little bit up from the budgeted amount, but down from prior year because of those changes in grant funding. I say that's an accounting surplus because we've got a lot of adjustments and things in there. On a cash flow basis, which is more in line with your budget, operations brought in a $3.4 million, just shy of $7 million of capital spending for 2024. Financing had a net cash inflow of $2.7 million, net of payments to the Regional Hospital District and payments of debt. So at the end of the year, a cash outflow of about $750,000. I promise I'd explain what's in the $44 million of accumulated surplus. You can see at the top, $29.3 million is what we call invested intangible capital assets. That's the value of all the infrastructure that you're managing and assets and equipment minus the debt. So that's not a cash balance. That's just an accounting balance there. And then there's $8.2 million set aside in reserve for future expenditures. That has increased year over year. 6.1 in statutory reserve funds, and a small function balance surplus of $453,654. Shifting gears a little bit into the audit and the audit process, we are happy to be providing what we call an unqualified audit opinion, so that it's a clean audit opinion. We are satisfied that the financial statements that you have in your package there are prepared accurately in all material respects in accordance with public sector accounting standards for local government. We're ready to sign our report. The last step is board approval here today. We have all of our audit work squared away for the year. When we go through our audit process, we look at the controls in place to ensure you're getting accurate financial reporting. We're not specifically testing that the controls are effective. It's more efficient for us to just check year-end balances, but we're looking at how they're designed, are they implemented, and if there's any risks or concerns, we would bring those forward to management. When we're looking at those year-end balances, we sample transactions. We don't look at every transaction throughout the year. It's just part of our audit process. And if we were to look at every transaction, we would be there for the entire year because there are a lot of transactions going through. Again, a big thank you to Linda and Alan and the staff throughout the regional district for helping us with the audit and getting the financial statements into your hands today. I already mentioned audit is complete, ready to sign. An important number for the audit is that second bullet of materiality. So we calculate that as a percentage of your annual revenues. And then that number drives our audit testing. I have to look at everything that's over $800,000. So your large capital projects and tax requisitions and things like that, large grants. And then below $800,000, we sample to get comfort over the financial statements. If we found something that we disagreed with staff on and it was larger than $800,000, I couldn't give you a clean audit opinion. So that is that bar for a clean audit opinion or a qualified audit. There are no significant amounts to bring to the board's attention with respect to unadjusted items. There's no limitations placed on our audit. We had access to all the documents we wanted to see, all the people we wanted to talk to. We didn't find any irregularities or unusual, conflict of interest or related party transactions. We're not specifically looking for fraud when we were performing a financial statement audit, but if something came to our attention, it will be required to report it out to the board. So I have nothing to report out to you today. So that is good news. I will confirm our independence, from January 1st, 2024, all the way through to the end of the audit period today, April 29th. We didn't do any other projects with the regional district that would impair my ability to give you an independent audit opinion. And I'll stop there. I'd be happy to answer any questions from the board.
Thanks very much. It's always nice to receive a positive report from the auditor. I just want to give kudos to our staff for being able to keep us on track and producing that information that provides the results in a clean report. Do we have any questions for the auditor? Yeah, I'll go Director Fall, then McCormick, then Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Vanderhorst, for again good report, and I'm happy that we got a clean result. I just want to ask a general question, just also to be really clear, and I'll explain why maybe after the answer. But the reserves, so on one of the slides, it showed the reserves for future expenditures. That's the non-statutory reserves, 8.2 million, and then the statutory reserves, 6.1 million, and then the 6.1 million is a table in the report that lists all those, and the 8.2 are distributed among the different services. So the question is, those represent, that's 14 million, that represents actual, does that represent actual cash and investments in our holdings?
Yes, thank you, Director Fall. Yes, it does. Those funds are there. Your cash and investment total is $24 million on the face of the balance sheet, and then in that 24 is, as you said, the $14 million that is set aside for those reserves. Yeah.
That's great. That's mostly just so that it's clear to everyone. And the reason I say that is because, and this is public knowledge now, but the Vancouver Island Regional Library had a very large set of reserves, which we were very happy with until we realized that not all of them were actually funded. They were aspirational. They were on paper, which was not a problem accounting. There was nothing wrong. The only thing that was wrong was that there was a gap in understanding of what they meant. So the Vancouver Island Regional Library is moving towards, and it takes a few years, because when we realized that, we said we want the reserves to represent actual real numbers that you can go and look at a bank account and say, yeah, there's a GIC there, or some, MFA or something that you basically can point to the money, and it's not a kind of earmark of some future taxation or something funny like that. Because I think for the public, when the public sees reserves, they probably want to imagine, well, when you call it a reserve, it actually means, there's a bank account you can open up. There's not quite a checking account, but there's a balance there. So thank you for that. I'm really glad to have that confirmed.
Yes. Thank you, Director Fall. Yeah, that is definitely something we're looking at closely, as you mentioned, with the regional library system, that it got into an unfunded position there. So that's something that we put in a lot of findings letters, whether it's if it is in an unfunded position. So we don't have that language in there this year because it is funded, and that's a good thing to point out.
Yeah, and just if I may just comment, I think it's not a problem to have numbers on that are unfunded, as long as they're really clearly identified, because there's no problem to say we plan to put something there, but actually anyone reading it wouldn't understand that to be reserved. They would understand that to be, here's a earmark that we've committed to do this at some point in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. My question is about your comment that materiality was set at 800,000. So I'm just wondering how that figure was determined.
Thank you, Director McCormick. Yeah, it's calculated as a percentage of your revenues. So if you back calculate based on the 18.8, it's going to fall somewhere in the 3 to 5% of revenues. That's generally our acceptable range, and that gets us to a level of audit work that gets us comfort over the numbers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Director Elliott.
Taking my mute off here. So my question has to do with the reserves too, and I just wondered about statutory reserves, and they must be required by statute, and they seem to have gone down. And is that could someone explain to me what the statutory reserves are and why they'd be going down?
Sure. Maybe I'll thank you, Director. Maybe I'll start and then turn it back to staff. You have the difference between what's set up by bylaws and some of those statutory amounts. The decreases there is going to be funding and use of some of those funds, and then the reserve for future expenditure may not have a bylaw behind it, or may have a board motion. I'll turn over to Linda to see if she wants to elaborate any further on those changes year over year and those balances.
Go ahead, Ms. Greenham.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, through the chair. So we have all of the statutory reserves are set up by bylaw, And non-statutory reserves don't always have a bylaw behind them. So why they've gone down is we've used some of the statutory reserves over the year. And one example is community works. So we did use some of the community works in the year. And I'm trying to think of one other one that we used. We used some of the Myrtle Pond water system reserves for a capital project. And then the Malaspina, I have to look at the capital plan again, sorry. What we spent in 2020.
So basically they're set up by bylaw. We pay into them annually, but sometimes we do projects and use the money.
That's correct. And that's
Okay.
and that's all budgeted through the budgeting process.
Perfect. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands, I think we'll cut you loose for the afternoon, Mr. Vanderhorst. Thanks very much for meeting with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on to correspondence. We have 3 items there. I'd like to move item 6.3 to make it 7.1. Does anybody else have any things that they want to discuss or make a motion on? Director Lennox?
6.2, please, Chair.
Okay, so 6.2 is now 7.2. So moving on, 7.1, which was the former 6.3, is just a request for support for a enter for Prisma. Like to we pass this letter. Thank you, Director Gisborne. Any discussion? Being done, all in favor? Motion carries unanimously. Great. And 6.2, which is now the 7.1. Director Lennox. Director Lennox frozen. Director Lennox? Can you hear us? So you're up for, you wanted to have item 7.2?
Yeah, sorry, Chair. My internet connection's pretty poor, so I lost you for a bit, but I'm back.
You're back.
Yeah, so are we at that point now?
Yep.
Thanks. So just a question to staff there. I noticed the correspondence. Noticed that we got an original payment of 48,000, but we didn't spend it all. I just wanted to know if that was planned or if we missed an opportunity, or if we're able to, get another addition of the money in the next phase, sort of thing, from staff there.
Okay, I think Mr. Toms is probably the right guy to answer that. He's got his hand up, so go ahead.
Yeah, if I can through the chair, that version of the grant is now closed. At that year, we'd worked with our fire chiefs around the intent to use some of the training dollars from the province to develop some mental health training capacity, critical incident stress management, the kind of concerns that our firefighters, first responders are dealing with. We didn't get the uptake that we'd hoped ultimately as we rolled out. So we didn't spend as much money as we'd budgeted and that the province had offered us through the grant. So we had to return that. This grant has reappeared each year now for the past, I think, 3 years. We're hopeful it'll come again. The current year, we're using it for a more traditional ask of fire equipment in all of our fire halls. So we are still using the grant each time it appears.
Thanks very much. Did that answer your question? Lost him again. So I'm going to assume it answered his question. So
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Okay, perfect. Moving on to the chair's report. The month, I'll try to get through this quickly. On April 1st, the CAO and I met with our CMP Staff Sergeant Lee Dyson. He and CAO and I were involved in the interviewing process, so it was nice to meet him face to face. And we just discussed meeting that we ultimately had with him and the board, and we are just going to continue with the tradition, I guess, that we used to have with Staff Sergeant Weeb, where he would report to us occasionally to let us know how things are happening in the region and more specifically in the electoral areas. On April 4th, I attended the Tla'amin Complex Care opening. I was really pleased to be invited to the dedication of the care opening out at Tisosum. Directors Southcott and Elliott were out there as well. Beautiful day, beautiful ceremony. The homes themselves are really nice and will provide a safe place to live for some of their community's most vulnerable. I understand that plans are in place to expand it from the existing 4 homes. So that's great for them. Fantastic. April 10th to the 13th, I believe all of us attended the AVICC Nanaimo. Lots of interesting sessions, fun evening out with representatives from the QRD and the city. And one event that stood out to me was the tour of the regional landfill. That was really quite fascinating. I like the fact that they use a lot of really up-to-date technology to assess the density of the landfill and like where they should be placing and compacting the municipal solid waste. But I also got a kick that they rely on a full-time falconer to chase away the seagulls. So they actually had a girl there. I think they had 5 falcons that they would go up and, not all at the same time, but one at a time and go and chase the seagulls away. And one of the reasons, well, there's 2 big reasons. One, it keeps garbage from getting into the trees because the birds don't take it away. But also, I never thought of this before, the big waves of seagulls that would occur when the machine operators would move their machine would actually cause motion sickness for the operators because it would kind of swirl around it and mess up with their heads. So now they don't have the seagulls around because of the falcons. That was a really neat tour. April 14th, library trustees, pretty normal. They're still dealing with the repairs associated with the flood. To my understanding, the problem spot is outside the footprint of the building, therefore outside the library's control, but measures are being taken to reduce the likelihood of another flood in the future. April 21st to the 23rd, in the CAO and I attended the Chairs CAOs conference in Victoria. It's quite good. Chairs got together at one point to discuss items that we could have some joint advocacy on, the idea being that there's more strength in numbers. And one of the items that was targeted was close to our hearts, which was aging water systems and the expenses associated with them. So the next step is to have a letter written that a bunch of chairs can sign and hopefully get a meeting down at UBCM to address the issue. April 23rd, 24th, it was the MFA AGM, Municipal Finance Authority, AGM. Always interesting. The AGM portion of the meeting is pretty standard. They tend to bring in quite good speakers to make it more attractive. And a lot of the conversation was about the tariffs and the federal election. April 25th was fantastic. It was the groundbreaking for the Northside Community Recreation Center. I don't want to say too much because I mentioned Director Lennox is going to run away with it, but I just want to say it's fantastic to take part in those things because it's just such a positive environment around there and see neat things going forward. It's great when you have community members spearhead these projects, push them through to fruition. And then April 28th, just yesterday, was the National Day of Mourning, which is a day dedicated to remembering, honoring those who have lost their lives or suffered injury or illness in the workplace. It's always a solemn event. Director Southcott was there with me representing the PC ambulance service. Right, yeah. And a lot of recognition was given to those who are consistently advocating for safer work environments, so we can continue to strive towards a reduction or elimination of workplace injuries and deaths. So that's what I've got. Director Southcott, why don't you? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. And 1 or 2 of those events with you. Lots of things going on over the past month. I'll just mention that I've attended a number of events that have focused on climate, which is interesting because it seems to me climate is not peripheral, but behind many other concerns these days. And I'm not saying that to de-emphasize the importance of the concern, but the concern seems to be integrating into various other concerns. It's being integrated into thinking in a broader way, which I'm really glad to see. So that included a webinar from the Post-Carbon Institute, Vancouver Island and Coastal Communities Climate Leaders, CEA Climate Leader Boot Camp series that started on the 2nd and is being facilitated by Andrea Rammer. So it's really very enjoyable to be working with her. She's quite an amazing human being. On the 7th, Municipal Climate Costs Recovery Litigation Review. There are 3 fairly substantial legal corporations in British Columbia that are working on this, not just West Coast environmental laws. Some of us may be aware are working on that. It's been called Sue Big Oil. There are initiatives going on in the States and other places that are way ahead of Canada. Canada has a very particular legal structure that is different than the States and other places in the world. But it is definitely, it is thought that there's an imbalance in compensation for climate-related and community-shouldered expenses due to climate risk. We have some examples here within the city, seawall and flooding. We may remember some years ago up at Quality Foods, and there was definitely a storm overload. BC MCLC did a webinar with Minister Neal, who is the Walrus minister, and it was very much focused on, obviously, on water. And this is another angle that climate concerns seem to be really embracing hydrology more and have done over the years. So a whole bunch of things, and there was a good session at really enjoyable session of many people who I've worked with over the years at ABICC, and that's why I missed the Olynyk event. Can't do everything, so I made a choice. Just to mention a couple of other my board responsibilities. This goes back into the end of March, but I did attend a North Island 911 board meeting. I'll just mention that that's ongoing. I don't think I reported on this previously. North Island 911, and I believe the local services and Manager Toms could probably fill in on any detail. I don't think it's necessary at this point, but our systems seem to be kind of ahead of the average as far as the upgrade to the new generation 911. They have a feeling of comfort, and the North Island 911 is really a pretty assertive organization that is on the forward edge of looking after their responsibilities. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be sitting on that board. I also attended the Nominations ceremony that the chair mentioned. That was wonderful to be out there. It also was morphed into, or was included in, their 9th anniversary celebration of their treaty, which was the day after. The anniversary was actually the day after. Let's see what else here. I was going to be at the Northside Rec opening, but instead I attended an afternoon-long board meeting, they called it, but actually it was a big, huge tour by the Paul River Community Forest. And we went in various vehicles and surveyed a lot of their lands, their operations, and it was amazing to be out there and actually see the operation firsthand and have the director of their board and their business manager giving us the lowdown and telling us the story of all of their business while we were looking at the land and looking at the operation. It was really, really an amazing opportunity to see how extensive, and also wasn't talked about, but see the success of this community forest. Our region is amazingly fortunate to have been awarded that in the late 90s and have it in operation since, I think, 2006 or 8. Yeah, so I think that is my report. That's plenty. Oh, one more thing. BC Social Procurement Initiative. I did attend an executive committee, what's called an executive committee meeting a couple of weeks ago. That essentially is very similar to what the advisory committee used to be. They're just looking for and working on carrying this initiative forward. It's very well established now. Many local government jurisdictions are utilizing their services. I think our staff are quite familiar with this, but it's good to be reconnected with them, having been involved since, I think, 2015 through the city. So that's my report. Thank you, Chair.
That's awesome. Thanks very much. Director Gisborne.
Thank you, Chair. Not a ton to report. As you know, we all attended AVICC, had some incredible sessions. Really took a lot from the Olynyk session. I got a bunch of notes that I still have to kind of go through my bag and handle all of it, because for those that tried to contact me after AVICC and haven't gotten a response, when I got home, my little 6-year-old was having a medical issue that we got resolved last Friday. So I'm catching up on a lot of emails, and I missed a lot of, I had invites to come out to things, and I couldn't get away from the home. So with that, anyone who has not gotten a hold of me that was expecting something to get back, I am still going through my emails, and I offer you my apologies. I'll get to you. But good news is she ended up going in for some surgery on Friday, and now she's doing well. So that's it for my report.
I hear she's doing better. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I'll try to be as brief as I can. I tell you guys there's lots going on in Area A. So I'll start with AVICC. That was a good year this year. Good to get together with the coastal communities. I enjoyed facilitating the water workshop for in our EA lunch for the small water systems. There was some work going on with Moti as well, and I thought it went well. And really, the main thing is we came away with some potential actions to take to the ministries instead of just politely complaining. So I thought it went quite well. It was interesting to hear from Brittany Anderson, the new minister that supports to kind of corral all these different ministries. So we'll be reaching out to her. I'll just switch gears here. I appreciate recent dock work in Lund, although it's a federal initiative. We've been getting some good work there. I met with Director Southcott and my brother-in-law out in Lund recently, and just talking about the recent presentation on the Council of BC Yacht Clubs and stern ties and sort of how we're using our marine environment. And then I had a chance to touch bases with some of the Tla'amin councillors on that, and obviously a bit of a different perspective, but I thought that was a interesting meeting and discussion. We got our another Savory official community plan advisory committee meeting completed on the 14th. Big group. It's hard to do virtually, but that group has a lot to offer, and just the passion they have for Savory is very apparent. So we're looking at next session of OCP meetings coming up, I hope in May, because we realize we need to meet more often. So thanks to staff for the work on that. Our recent meeting there, getting to know Brandon Louie. He was with us earlier today with the hospital district, and he's situated out in Lund. So I've been able to touch bases with him on some sort of pain points that the nation has in their business and as it relates to the region. So I'm really enjoying, really talking to people who are there in the community on that. Hang on. I do have to touch on the recent tragic events on Savory. It's a couple days after that, we had our advisory committee meeting, and it was tough. And, severe loss. Words don't even qualify what happened over there. I've seen some recent communication from the family who are very gracious and grateful for the outreach from the community. And I appreciate that too. I say this a lot, but it's so true, that love and respect for our responders, because going to those calls is just crazy, right? So, there's been a lot in the media. You saw recently in Vancouver, the terrible events that happened there. Those responders, my brother was one of them. So he's one of our constituents too. So, those are the tough times, makes you realize what's real. ASIC. I just got a call from ASIC on Savory. They've managed to get a meeting with Ministry of Transportation and Transit. They're going to invite me, which is great. So that's improving the relationship there and with that ministry. I wanted to note on May 18th at 10 o'clock, there's the Great Savory Island Beach cleanup that's happening. So every year that group gets out, I'm going to get over there too and pick up some trash and we leave it on the beach, and then some of our local volunteer businesses come and gather that, and the regional district helps with that as well. And then finally, the awesome event last Friday in Lund. I mean, we work on a lot of problems, right? Stuff that's tough, stuff that we may all disagree, but Chair Brander did a great job explaining. It was so fun. And the Tla'amin Nation, Elder Timothy gave us a blessing. The Hagus was there, and multiple counselors, and just the goodwill, the decades of work that these people put in. Like it's awesome. So we tried to put a shovel in the ground, but it's Lund, so it hit rock, so we had to fake it and put some dirt on the grass. But it's super exciting, and we're the contractor that's there. They were there in full force. The CEO of the company was there. It was a great day. So thanks for everybody to come. Good way to end it. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, it really was a fun day, and it's great to see so many people show up for it. Director Elliott.
Hi, sorry, I was just trying to get out of my mute. So I don't want to repeat the events that other people have tagged me at already, because I got enough things to talk about. April 10th, I attended the final Supportive Housing Community Advisory Committee meeting for our property where the supportive housing is. They're winding down their formal community advisory committee process, and they plan to do something that's called a neighborhood integration plan, and this is BC Housing, not Lift. And this neighborhood integration plan hasn't been quite laid out so it's not clear exactly what it will include, but it will include local folks' participation, and they were able to hear our concerns and wanting to focus on defining avenues to receive, plug in, and get responsiveness from the community for issues that come up. And having the ability to maintain a connection and build relationships with BC Housing and key people within the community so that it's a functional relationship. Went to AVICC, of course. I also went to the final ferry advisory committee happened, and I did it without taking notes. They put out a document about what they had heard as far as wrapping up the old advisory committee and how they plan to continue on. And there's a whole document. I think it will come out to everybody. If not, I can send it. But essentially, local governments are going to have to advocate directly to BC Ferries. I think there won't be a formal way for us to participate in an advisory type group in the future. That's defunct. They're going to be doing access to surveys online. There's a lot of online access for funneling information directly. But if BC government or if our local government wants to advocate for anything in particular, we're going to have to do it directly, as far as I can tell, just so the board's aware that that avenue of just participating on that advisory committee is not really going to be open to us as a way of addressing our ferry stuff on an ongoing basis. And I noticed recently the mayors in the Lower Sunshine Coast signed a letter directly to the minister to advocate for issues that we normally would have brought through an advisory committee. I don't know if we want to put, I guess we just put things on an issue by issue basis forward through our regular board process from now on. The supportive housing, I talked about that one already. The Western All PAG, so that's Western Forest Products has public advisory groups in most of their areas. Here in our Stillwater area, we call it a community advisory group. And I sit on that one for the city, but Clay wasn't at this particular meeting. The nice thing was they had at the all PAG, meaning like online and in each place. They had sent some executive from Western out to each place, and we got to have the I gotta get to the right page in my little book here. We got to have Stuart Glenn, who's the chief forester for Western, come meet with us here in our community at our meeting, and we got to talk about Western in general and how they had some downtakes in a lot of their profits. Their profits weren't exactly great over the last number of years, and the single most problematic thing for them has been unpredictability of fiber and regulatory certainty. And so the message they're trying to advocate with governments across the board is we need a way to get regulatory certainty for companies so that they can plan their operations, because the not being able to plan ahead is really costing them. And the new way of doing that is the IRMPs, which is integrated resource management plans. And they're hoping that once these IRMPs are signed on with First Nations and everybody, that results in the certainty that they need. And so anything we can do to advocate with governments to increase certainty for companies as far as regulatory restrictions go, they need to know. And they're hoping for our help on that. So what's on my list here? And the Community Action Team, April 28th, I attended our Community Action Team meeting, and we had our Public Health Officer, Dr. Modi Kakatla there, and she did have kind of some good news. She said in general, the amount of deaths due to overdoses has been trending downward. However, there was a bit of a spike toward the end of 2024 that caused numbers to come in almost on par with 2023, but it appeared to be an anomaly. But they would have to have data beyond 2024 for a little longer to figure out if that was just a spiky anomaly or if there was something else going on with that, likely some sort of toxic lump of things. The other folks providing updates there included Lyft saying the CRC occupancy was delayed about 2 more weeks, but they were answering knocks on the door to give out some food or needed water or whatever folks were needing, but their doors were not quite open yet, and they had a delay on their occupancy for that. The drug checking in our community is on a bit of a delay right now because it's doing sampling, pause for sampling, they said, at the Roots Center. But Cohaman is doing, out at Cohaman, they're doing drug checking still, and you can text or email ahead if you're heading that way. So if folks need that service, Courtney Harp runs the one out there. The shelter update for a land assessment on the Barnett Street location is looking good and viable. They're really hoping to have more specific updates on that very soon. The Youth Cat reported that they had done a federal election education push and did a profile of all the candidates, which they put out through the Brooks School and all of the university for young people, and they had some good responses from folks who were interested in learning how to vote. And they also have a harm reduction focus coming up in November, a window to look at how they could play some documentaries that are specific to harm reduction, and they partner with the theater and what's the name of that? Cinema Politica to put out films and showings of documentaries, and they have a window for organizing one of those sessions in November, and they're looking for suggestions of documentaries that would help in the harm reduction area. The education and Youth Cat together put out their next release of their newsletter for everything cat related and everything going on is May 5th. That will be released on the cat website. So if you're interested in the newsletter for everything cat, it will be their next newsletter comes out on May 5th. And I think that, oh, and this Friday, just for everyone's information, there's the Missing Murders of Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirited Red Dress Walk starting at T-Squat at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, followed by candlelit ceremony at the Wellington Beach somewhere around 5 p.m. once the walk arrives at the beach and they get organized in their circle. So those are things I wanted to, that is my report. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I wish BC Ferries all the best with this new plan they have for public engagement, but at the same time, I am disappointed that they're no longer going forward with the ferry advisory committees. We'll see how it all turns out. Director Fall.
Thank you, Chair. At the beginning of April, the Skidie Island Waste Management Advisory Committee held a meeting and talked about a lot of different items. It was quite good. One that was really useful was a report shared by our Manager of Environmental Services, Mr. Cohenhoven, with appreciation, which was a monitoring report on the landfill, which has been closed for a few years on Skidie. And ongoing monitoring shows some issues in the creeks, but nothing that comes from the landfill. It's actually issues in the water above the landfill as well. So it's actually good news. The landfill is carrying on and doing the closure is doing what it's supposed to do. I won't cover a lot from AVICC. I was there too. The only item I'll mention is a workshop I attended called Taking Stock of the Trade War, Local Government Impacts, which was a macroeconomic analysis done by UBCM on potential and likely impacts of the tariffs and the degree to which stimulus spending may offset the impacts. UBCM will likely use this analysis to lobby for increased funding, in particular increasing Community Works Fund, because getting money to local governments is one way that we can offset the areas. Local governments can identify the areas with the highest impact and help hedge against that. If you're interested, there's a report on the analysis available on the UBCM website. If you just go to the UBCM website, you'll find it very easily. After AVICC, I attended virtually a presentation on Climate Caucus on insurance climate impacts in municipalities by Mr. Craig Stewart, who leads the national workforce on our team on disaster resilience and climate change at the Insurance Bureau of Canada. He explained how insurance companies distribute risk via reinsurance companies, really big companies in the background. And there has been a trend for these reinsurers to shift to less risky areas. For example, he cited that Lloyd's has more or less pulled out of Canada. And that leads to insurers, regular insurance companies, increasing premiums or withdrawing service entirely, which in turn leads to growing protection gaps, including no coverage for certain perils, such as landslides, increasing deductibles for the same coverage, or reducing coverage for the same price. The presentation reviewed some actions that local government can take, and fortunately, I believe we're taking a number of these, which is good. Some of those include identifying and communicating severe weather risk. We have our emergency communication system, which is good. Support for reducing risk for existing homes, such as FireSmart, which we're doing, which is great. Promoting community cohesiveness, so people can communicate better during emergencies, and setting measurable targets in strategic plans. And maybe that's something we can discuss next time we reopen and review the strategic plan. On a positive side, on the conservation front, BC Parks Foundation, which is a nonprofit society, has recently acquired 2 new parcels at the south end of Skidie Islands that helps form a contiguous 568 acres of conservation properties, 5 properties in total. Some are held by BC Parks Foundation, some are held by, one is held by the Islands Trust Conservancy, and one is held by BC Parks, Squiddy Bay Provincial Park, which many of you know. There's an article in the Powell River Peak on it, if you want to see where that is. It's a really good news. That's a big contiguous area for a relatively small island. And finally, on May the 3rd, upcoming, is the mural unveiling by the XLAP Liskidi Archaeological Project and the Liskidi Arts Council, which I reported on last month. The unveiling will occur from between 11 and 12 at the False Bay Dock, if anyone is showing up by boat. And then attendees will travel to the community hall to view a traveling exhibit on the archaeological project that's been all across Canada. And that will be followed by a shared meal at the hall. So if people show up, that would be great. We're looking forward to it on the island here. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Director Fall. Regarding those steps that can be taken to reduce our risk, it's always nice to hear when we're ahead of the curve, that we're already have some of those suggestions initiated. And Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. First item I'd like to report on is the Texada Island Recreation Commission, which actually met on 2 separate occasions on March 20th and 27th. And the reason it had to meet twice was because it was a hybrid virtual in-person meeting, and it was impossible to hear staff who were at the office from the in-person portion of the meeting. So the communication breakdown led to the closing of the meeting and then reopening it a week later. Interestingly enough, this is the same facility that we had our last Board on the Road meeting at the old school building in Gillies Bay. So there's been some changes with the internet provision there, and not all for the best. However, I'd like to share with you one motion that was passed, a 2-part motion from the Rec Commission, which I'm hoping that we will hear more about at this table, and that is that the Texada Recreation Commission supports the construction of an active transportation corridor on the upper side of the road between Gillies Bay and Shelter Point Park. The second recommendation is that the Texada Recreation Commission recommends the board direct staff to explore opportunities to finance and construct an active transportation corridor on the upper side of Gillies Bay Road between Gillies Bay and Shelter Point Park. So that gets that issue on your radar screen, and please watch for that to come back to this table at some point. On the 29th of March, I attended the Texada Island Health Services Society AGM, and interestingly enough, they are looking to become part of a program under the BC Mental Health and Addictions Program to train local residents in how to talk down people who are agitated and help with security at the health center. And so training is provided, paid training is provided. And so we're certainly exploring becoming part of that. ABICC, April 11th to the 13th. You've all talked about it, so there's not much I can add. On the 14th of April, though, there was a community meeting organized by the community regarding the Xerox mining notice that we've discussed at this table previously. It was attended by about 50 people. I acted as the moderator, and it started with a review of the OCP. Then Xerox presented a lot of information about their project, and we went around in a circle, twice going around asking questions and getting information. So it was very well attended. It was a very civil meeting, and that was good. On the 26th, I participated in the Renew Art Fair at the Qathet Art Center, and it was for artisans who work with recycled materials, which I do in the form of beach blasts. So I was part of that, and it was really fun to see the very creative ideas that people have for reusing materials, some of which were taken out of our Resource Recovery Center. So most interesting. And I'd like to close, Chair, with a final note about the Ferry Advisory Committee, because I served on that committee for more than 10 years and found it to be a most useful avenue for dialogue. It was dialogue because we did take information that they presented to us back to the community for comment, and we again brought issues of the community such as the never-ending, goal of the Triangle Run to BC Ferries. I really feel that that's been a mistake to not carry on with the ferry advisory committees. And I had the opportunity to say so. I was one of the attendees at a pop-up session on a ferry during their consultation period, and made that very point, that I believe they were a very effective means of communication with both communities and local governments. So I'm very sorry to see their demise. Thanks, Chair.
I think there are a lot of us that are sad to see their demise. Thank you very much. You know what? I think I'm going to call about a 5-minute break here before we continue with the rest of the agenda, if that's okay with everybody. Okay. All right. Let's say 5 o'clock. It's 4:54 according to
Huge consent agenda.
Recording in progress.
Hey, welcome back. We are up to the consent agenda. We have the opportunity to pull anything from it. There is only one item, so.
So moved.
Thank you. I don't see anybody wanting to pull it, so it's been moved by Director Gisborne, seconded by Director Southcott. All in favor? Carries unanimously. Okay, moving on to Donna reports. 13.1, recommendation.
Moved.
Director Gisborne, seconded by Director Fall. Any discussion? Seeing none, we already went through this with the auditor, so everything should be pretty clear. The question, all in favor? None opposed, motion carries. Bylaws, Nootka Street zoning amendment bylaw number 321.2, 2025. Would somebody like to read that?
I'll move that the board give first and second reading of Nootka Street zoning amendment bylaw number 321.2, 2025.
Seconded by Director Lennox. Any discussion? Director Gisborne?
Yeah, my understanding of process is that we do first and second reading of this amending bylaw, like at this meeting, and then at a subsequent meeting, we do third reading and adoption, you know, because there's that kind of gap for potential public feedback. Is that correct, Chair?
I'm gonna pass it over to the corporate officer. She can give us the lowdown.
Sorry, I think with your with regards to planning processes.
Of course. Ms. Rodden.
Hello, thank you, Chair. Through the chair, the bylaw will come back to the board for third reading and adoption at the next meeting. And there has to be, I can't recall what the LGA states, but there's a certain number of days between second reading and third reading. However, it's not to allow for public engagement. That requirement has been met.
Very much. Go ahead.
But if the public do wish to provide feedback, they still can, though, right? Through correspondence or delegations or so on and so forth. Is that correct?
Ms. Rodden?
Through the chair. Yes, I mean, the notice appeared in the Peak for 2 weeks and has been on the notice board and on the website. But to date, there's been no feedback or questions or inquiries regarding the amending bylaw.
Great, thank you very much. Seeing no other hands, we'll go back to Director Gisborne.
Yeah, and then that brings me to my next question, which is, this is a result of a motion passed, I believe, at the beginning of the month or end of March, but we also passed a motion recommend that we do first and second reading of Nootka Street zoning amendment bylaw 321.3. And I'm just wondering, why wouldn't we do first and second reading of that bylaw and then wait and then, you know, do the public engagement and all that kind of stuff. That way the public knows, you know, that we've done first and second reading that bylaw. So I'm just wondering, where is that bylaw and when is it coming before this assembly? First and second reading.
Ms. Rodden?
Through the chair, I believe I explained this at committee. These are two separate processes. One is an applicant-driven process, and we're much further along in that. It's at the end of the road. And the other is a new initiative, and the bylaw affects all properties. And so it triggers the need for public engagement under our communications and engagement policy. And so that will not come to the board for first and second reading until it's presented to the community, because it may be subject to changes.
Thank you very much. Okay, Director Gisborne?
Yeah, I guess I'm just confused about the April 8th motion, which read that the board endorsed the proposed Nootka Street zoning amendment bylaw number 321.3, 2025, and that the bylaw be forwarded to a future board meeting for first and second reading. I believe the conversation that we had back then was that we would do first and second reading, then we would get public engagement and feedback, and then we would potentially amend it based on the public's feedback. So the motion that we had for 321.3 was that it would come before the board for first and second reading. I know that's a separate bylaw. I'm very aware of that. Just wondering, the question is, when is that coming before this board for first and second reading?
Okay, corporate officer.
I'm not sure when it will come forward, but I do know that like the public notice that is developed for those does undergo like significant review and oftentimes requires legal. So it will, that item will be put into the work. It's not on mine to review currently. The public notice for this item had been reviewed, I think, back in February or January. So the work for this one had already been completed. There's a whole new.
Thanks very much. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Motion carries. Okay, new business 15.22 and 3. I guess I'm not really sure what we're doing. It's 3 items. No recommendations associated with them. Is it just for our information? Dr. Fall, did you add these to the agenda?
Yes. So as you all know, we had those who participated, we had these 3 meetings, and we came up with these recommendations, which were unanimous at the service review groups. And so the question then came up of how do they get moved forward? So do they come to the board? So they're on our agenda here, and of course the within those are more or less recommendations from those planning review groups to the board, but only the board can really act on them. So what I would suggest, if the members of each group is interested, I think it would be appropriate to refer each one to staff for a report on how to move forward on those recommendations. Because I don't, unless someone else has another idea of how we actually turn those planning, the service review group recommendations into actions, I think one way would be to have a motion, for example, the social planning one, refer that to staff for a report, and then staff can digest it and bring forward, proper recommendations or motions or critiques or information related to what was agreed upon at those meetings.
I'm gonna ask the corporate officer or the CAO, does that seem like a reasonable way to proceed? CAO.
Through the chair, well, if you're looking for information from staff, I think this would be correct to that in motion. Seems reasonable to me.
Great. Well, let's look at 15.1. Somebody who's part of the social planning service review. Somebody want to make a motion to proceed on that? Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I am prepared to make a motion. Hopefully that it's a bit on the fly for the corporate officer, but I think we understand the intent. It's really to answer the questions that we have listed there. The committee feels like we can't really move forward without some answers, and then that way we can get our work done. So I'm not sure. I guess my motion be to the effect that requesting a staff report to answer the questions that the social planning service review has listed from the March 17th, 2025 meeting.
Reasonable. Seconder? Southcott, thanks. Any discussion?
The social planning service review group, which came up with the list of questions or seeking for information and minimum cost to keep the service, what is the minimum cost to keep a service that is dormant? I think the answer to that currently under our administration bylaw is $1,500. The minimum cost to create a new service, social planning service, can it have a requisition limit? Other services to administer MRDT and potential internet organizations, and what are the options to include social planning issues throughout the organization? The reason I'm highlighting these is if we ask for a written staff report, that's going to create additional cost to the social planning service. And I think some of these questions can be very easily answered by, essentially a verbal report. What is the minimum cost to keep a service that is dormant? I don't think we need a 5-page report on that. I think it's a fairly straightforward question. And the social planning service, I think, is a very simple situation that we have in front of us. And I'm wondering, do we actually need a full written report? And also, how long is this report going to take? I guess is my next question, because there's action items, that sometimes they take years. And we've already had an informal service review staff report for social planning. I think that was 2023, maybe, if I remember. So that's where my questions arise, is how long is this going to take for a staff report? And would it be possible to get, like a verbal report or like a Cole's notes? Because one of the reasons why I'm so unsatisfied with social planning is it keeps having costs. I'm trying to either reduce or eliminate those costs. That's kind of where my question is to our staff, is if we do send this off to a report, how long is it going to take? How much staff time is it going to consume?
I would imagine it's a challenging question to answer, and come up with answers. They have to do a little bit of research and compile it into a report, but I'll see it over the code box. Or have any answers for that? Go ahead, see it.
Through the chair, should a motion of this nature pass, it would go into our strategic progress report. And whoever it's assigned to would then have to determine how that fits into their work for the year. I can't speak for anyone as to where, how that might end up in their work plan. A lot of issues right now. OCP's on the go. Our issues on the go. Cannot really speak to a definitive timeline as to when this would actually be before you. And like I said, I can't speak for my staff.
Any other comments or just questions? I got Directors Fall and Elliott.
Okay, I'll just have a quick discussion. The reason why these questions came up was the service review group, which was most of us for this service, basically, wants to wrestle with the question of how to move forward or whether to move forward, and came up with these questions. Now, if some of them are so short that a verbal response would be due, well, then a staff report would be quite short. And if they do require more intensive or more extensive staff research and background, well, then so be it. That's what would be needed. So it's either very short, which wouldn't cost much for a staff report anyways, or it's more extensive and the comments from the CAO are pertinent, then that the there will be time involved and cost. But I guess would make I support the motion because I don't see any other way forward. If the as the facilitator of the group, if we don't have answers to those questions, then I don't see how the service review group would make conclusions, given that those were the questions that came up. And then the other recommendation that isn't being acted on right now, but the service review group would act on, is to meet again after receiving the requested information. So it's contingent on that. So whenever that might happen, then the service review group would have the basis for making recommendations on what to do with the service.
Very much, Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. 2 questions. First of all, when it comes to voting on these, because it's service review for services that the city hasn't isn't on those services, do we then not vote on these motions? And then my second point was that anytime information is requested for some type of formal process, such as a service review, I do think no matter how short the answers are, they're best off to be provided in writing, because that is how people are going to be using that information to wrap their heads around decisions coming out of that service review, and it should be transparent and easy for people to follow when they're looking back at that. So those are my comments, and my question was whether the city directors are able to vote in these motions.
That's a good question for the corporate officer.
Thank you. So with regards to the current motion that's on the table, that's social planning service, and that's that the board will staff report on the social planning. That would be restricted to social planning membership. The section 209 vote under the local government.
Thank you.
And Director Gisborne.
I'm wondering if we should put like a time constraint or a time limit on this motion. Because if we're asking for a staff report based on the work that's come out of our social planning service review meetings, one of the things to keep in mind is a formal statutory service review, which these 3 items are. They're done in such a way in the legislation that they are time constrained. Like, you know, once you submit to the minister, you have, I think, 65 days or something to get that first meeting going. So we've complied with that. We're moving forward. We've had some great meetings with our social planning or service review meeting groups. But if we're going to wait 6 months or a year or even longer to get these reports, I think that kind of defeats the purpose of what the formal service review guidelines are really all about. So if we are able to get these reports within, say, 6 months, which would be October, I'm fine with that. But if it's going to take longer than, October, it's going to take longer than 6 months, then I'll just send a letter to the minister saying I'm withdrawing from the service. Because we can't just keep waiting around, and I don't want to keep piling stuff onto our staff if it's, their desks are piled with that request from the board and these issues fall off the edge of the desk. Because the CAO is absolutely correct. We've got the Lund Waterworks system that we're dealing with. We've got a lot of important issues at our regional district that we're dealing with. And the problem I see with the social planning service is it's not really doing what it's intended to do. And I think it's easier to just kill the service. But if we're able to get this staff report in 6 months or less, I'll be happy with that. And then we can get back to meeting with our service review group. Otherwise, I don't see the point. In which case, let's just kill it. So should we do an amendment to say that we ask for the report and then it come to us within 6 months?
I would say I agree with Director Fall that a report is necessary. We can't really move forward without one. I am also of the mind that I'm not willing to question the staff's decisions on their scheduling of their tasks, because everything is important. Everything is there. I wouldn't want to say set aside this Avery OCP for the sake of this. This service right now is not costing us anything. So, if we have to wait a little while in order to either wrap it up or to continue it at a minimal cost, I don't think that's a big problem at this point. Certainly not big enough that I would be willing to set aside some other item that they have on their agendas. But other people can chime in if they choose to do so. Other speakers, so I guess Director Gisborne.
Yes, this service does have a cost, minimum $1,500 a year, plus salaries and staff wages, and asking for this report also has a cost. So yeah, the service does have a cost, and I do think it is up to the board to set our priorities for what we want to see coming back to us in a timely manner. And if it is the will of this board to say we want this report in 6 months or less, then we can do that. It's up to the board to set that as a priority. Otherwise, we leave it up to staff, and I wouldn't be upset with our staff we don't give them the direction. This could easily sit on the edge of the table because there are other competing priorities, official community plans, water systems, that are more important than a service which has been sitting dormant and doing nothing. And I think that we as a board can either make the tough decision and say we kill the service, or we can ask for a report, but we want to let's do it in a timely manner. Otherwise, we'll be after the next election, and then the next board's going to get the report and go, well, what is this all about?
Okay, well, we have a motion in front of us right now to request a staff report. Director Lennox, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I appreciate the comments, Director Gisborne, and I have similar tendencies, but I think we need the information. We give our staff the chance. Some of these, I think, we should be reasonably able to answer fairly quickly, and then it's up to us as we approach that sort of mark where if we're not getting the information, then we're going to have to make a decision. But really, these are the things that have come out of our discussion, so we be nice to at least get the majority of the answers, and maybe if there's the odd one that takes a little extra, we can talk about it then. Thanks.
Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask a question, and that is to staff regarding what their guesstimate of when this project would be tackled. What's the guesstimate of when they would get to it without trying to rearrange their work schedule or anything like that?
I think that his answer would be, it would be up to whomever gets tasked with creating this report, and we don't even know who that is, so we don't know what their workload is at this point. Yeah.
Through the chair, I won't be able to answer that question specifically. I want to perhaps with a slight deviation into what Director Lennox just said. There's been a comment made that if it's not here within 6 months, then something has to be done, perhaps withdraw. But why don't you leave it with staff, and we'll do our utmost to get it to you within 6 months. And if you've got 3/4 of it, the 6-month timing, so be it. If you've got the full thing, so be it. And heaven forbid you don't have anything, you have to some other recommendation or some other decision. For clarification too, and maybe it should be, as long as it's clarified, this report is being asked of staff to go back to the Social Planning Service Review Committee, correct? Not back to the board.
Yes.
That would make sense to me. So,
all right, so seeing no other hands, I guess the 5 people voting on this would be the electoral areas. So call the question, all in favor? And unanimous. Moving on to 15.2, same thing, at Malaspina Volunteer Fire Department. I'll make the same motion as we had for 15.1.
Second.
Gisborne seconds. Any discussion? Gisborne.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, we have a planning committee meeting tomorrow, and there's a proposed subdivision application which has a potential fire hall location, and I think that would impact one of the items, service area boundary distances from fire hall and insurance. Would those 2 items kind of be considered together when this goes to our staff for a staff report of that potential site?
I mean, the way I look at it is that it's just a potential site. It's not owned by the QRD. It's owned by a private entity. Whether it ever becomes a site for a fire hall is completely up in the air. We're not even considering it. So I think we should just take the view notes that we have from our meeting regarding the service and go from there. As far as we can come, when we get the information back from the staff, we can look at it, and if we're talking X number of kilometers from a certain location from the existing fire hall, I mean, you can always extrapolate that out if you want to do that personally, but I think making staff take things into consideration that may or may not ever come to fruition. It's a private property. It's not ours. We have no plans in place to create a new fire hall at this point. So I would just like to take the notes that we have, pass them on. The questions that we created can be answered, then go from there. Director.
Yeah, that was a question to our staff, and I believe that was already considered by a previous board before you or I were sitting here, and that's why the official community plan of Area C was amended to designate that parcel as institutional. So that's why I was wondering through the chair, if staff would consider that as a possibility as part of this report.
We'll ask the staff.
I see Mr. Toms is, come on.
Toms, your CAO, would answer that question or add anything.
Yeah, through the chair, could you repeat your question, please, Director Gisborne?
Oh, yes, there's a subdivision application on a piece of property that we're dealing with tomorrow, where years ago there was an amendment to the official community plan to designate it as institutional. And if memory serves, the discussion at the time was for a potential new fire hall. And I'm wondering if that site would be part of the consideration of this report, which is, service area boundary, which is distances from fire hall and insurance, if those two items would line up in that upcoming report.
I'd see you.
Mr. Chair, as you've indicated, that report is coming before the board or the committee tomorrow. Should this motion pass today, we're not going to complete it by tomorrow. So that gives ample time to find out what the outfall is of tomorrow's meeting as to whether or not that is indeed a site or not.
That answers my question. Thank you, CAO.
Great. Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Board. As Chair, as you can see in point 6 of this 15.2, there's several recommendations, and some of them I actually appreciate Director Fall from writing them this way, because it really says that the group is recommending to the board. So those are really our requests. And there's one also in the middle there for action from the Finance Committee. So that's a little bit different than a report. So I just want to identify that it appears to me that, we've Director Falls laid it out what our request is. So that would be my motion, if it makes sense.
Perfect. We already had that seconded. Are you okay with that? Okay, great. Director Gisborne?
Yeah, similar to the previous discussion, I would like the report, whether it's 10%, 50%, or 100% completed, to be able to come back in that 6 months timeline, because as Director Lennox accurately pointed out, there is an item in here for the service review group recommends that the board request staff to include an item in a Finance Committee meeting for a detailed budget review of the MVFD service early in future budgeting processes. So if we're able to get this information before our review group, by October at the latest, then we can actually start implementing that, because if this takes longer than 6 months, then we're getting into December and maybe even January. Well, that's kind of in the heavy part of our budget cycle, and therefore kind of defeats the recommendation here, which I believe is the 4th recommendation. So hopefully some of these are fairly straightforward. I would like to see what the staff come back with in 6 months or less. We can then have those review meetings reconvene with the information that is available. And, there might even be some items which maybe our staff come back with and say, hold on, this item is a whole lot of extra work. And, is the board sure you want us to, spend 1,000 hours or something like that on it? So I'm hoping for relatively straightforward and clear answers for this in a timely manner. And I don't want to just completely swamp our staff with a whole bunch of things. So if something looks to be like a lot of extra work, let us know and maybe we can reconsider.
Okay, I'm sure the staff will take that all into consideration, and as always, they will get the information to us in as timely a fashion as possible. So let's move on with this. This is the 2 members of the MVFD voting on this. So there's no more questions. I'll call the question. All in favor? The whole lot of us are. Motion passes. 15.3, same thing, sub-regional recreation service. This is where we have 3 members. And I'm imagining we probably want to proceed in a similar fashion as to the previous 2. So if somebody would like to make a motion to that effect. Directors Lennox or Gisborne. Thank you, Director Lennox. Seconded by Director Gisborne. Awesome. So assuming the motion is similar to the requests that we had for the first 2, discussion, Director Lennox.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just for staff that they understand, this is a bit worded a bit differently, right? We have a recommendation to consider bylaw amendments, so that's a little bit different. So just wanted to make sure if the intent is clear for our staff.
Getting nods, so looks like we're good. Back to you guys, board.
Yeah. I'm happy to seek a report, which is the last section, review the feasibility of recommended changes to the service establishment bylaw, rationale for the funding formula and stats of relatively usage by municipal compared to rural populations. I think that last one is information that the city of Powell River will need to provide to us. And this is where I'm a little kind of, maybe we're putting the cart before the horse here, because the item that's just before it is the service review group recommends that the board form a negotiating group with the terms of reference that includes that the negotiating group consist of the 3 participants, so on and so forth. The city of Powell River and the electoral area directors meet. And then the very last bullet point is shall conclude before the end of 2025. So this one, I'm thinking that maybe our first step is that we should actually get a terms of reference and form our negotiating group, because based on what comes out of the discussions between the 3 participants, areas A, B, and C, and the city, well, maybe in the end we want to make like a regional recreation service or something like that, in which case we're asking our staff to come back with a report. Maybe it's not what we want to actually do at the end of the day. I think the first thing we should do is get that negotiating group, meet with the city, and kind of hammer out kind of a long-term plan of like, what are we doing about the recreation complex? I don't necessarily think that asking for the report at this time is necessarily the best way forward. That's kind of, I want to hear what the other directors have to think about this one. I think we should meet with the city first before we start asking for a report on changing the bylaw. Because who knows, maybe we want to make a regional recreation service. I'll include Texada. No, just kidding.
I'll point out that one of the points is shall seek consensus on a funding formula prior to meeting with the city of Powell River. So one of the requests is specifically to have this funding formula before we meet with them. I make that.
Yeah, that means we form the group, then we build consensus, then we meet with the city. And then should be considering changing the bylaw based on what our consensus is. Right now, we're taught the motion is to ask for a staff report, but we haven't actually met to establish consensus.
Paul.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, this one, of course, each service review group, even though there was overlap with a lot of the people, the format of the agreements came out quite different, which is interesting to see. This one's actually kind of, in a way, crisp. It's got these bullet points and it's got these 3 pieces. And the third one was that the service review group seeks information from staff on the following. And the first bullet is the review of the feasibility of the recommended changes to the service establishment bylaw. So I would just suggest, and hopefully there's that the agreement was that, if this motion passes, it wouldn't be asking staff to come right back with that first item on the bylaw and say, here's a new bylaw. It's more coming back with a report saying, here's a feasibility of that. Is that possible? And so on. Then I think I would imagine the second thing staff would hopefully act on is to think about the second item, which is how, what is the next step to get this service review, this negotiating group together, which of course needs a terms of reference. So I think that logically flows out of the motion, even though, I don't know the exact wording, but I think, and I mean, I guess through the chair, I would see, I think staff would probably understand it that way. And that the last bits of the last item are some statistics. So I think, and I'm not part of the service, of course, but I think getting a bit of information simultaneously, or getting that in the queue, so to speak, while seeking to form that negotiating group. So the negotiating group doesn't just meet with the city right off. I think the negotiating group meets with each other and has some bit more information, lines up their ducks, and then meets with the city. And the city's going to, I assume, will need some time to get their ducks lined up, because once they hear there's a team QRD, they'll need to make a team city shortly afterwards and then engage. So that might take a while too. So I think these threads kind of move along, and the forming of the negotiating group can sort of get into the queue similarly with getting some more requests from staff on information. It's just a suggestion. I'm not voting, so I won't intervene anymore.
Thank you for your comments. I appreciate that. So have a motion. Gisborne?
Yeah, I would be willing to table this motion and then pass a motion that the board form a negotiating group and direct staff to draft terms of reference for sub-regional recreation service negotiating group. That's the second item on in this is that we form a second item is the service review group recommends that the board form a negotiating group. My stance is do that. Because we've already asked the city, or we passed a motion, ask the city to meet with us, get 2025's funding moving. So my attitude would be, let's table this motion, let's form a working group, direct staff to write up the terms of reference. That's kind of where I would like to go.
Well, I gotta say, I'm not really sure how to proceed with this one right now. You have a motion on the table as it is.
I move that we table this motion.
Yeah.
Through the chair, kind of studying the recommendations and next steps. It appeared to me that the next steps, the first and second paragraphs, are really up to the service review group. The only thing that staff is really being delegated are the last bullets. Those are the questions that you want some answers to. I think the working group meet whenever they pleased to flesh out first two paragraphs. In doing so, I would also recommend they figure out how and when they're going to approach the city, find out their availability. Because if you've been paying attention in the news, they don't have a CAO. They don't have a lot of support staff. And I don't know if that means the councillors are working overtime in other areas. But a lot of these things are all contingent on whether or not the city is going to meet with you and when. Let me find that out first. And in the meantime, staff can work on answering the questions in the last paragraph.
Okay, so we could take the motion as it is, and if staff is just under the assumption that they are going to work on those questions that they can answer, then maybe the service review group go forward and contact the city after we form. It's just the three of us that are in it. You directors Lennox and Gisborne. Because that's not something that we can really ask the staff to do. But that means we could still proceed with the motion as it is. Then the staff could provide that information to us if they're able to. Does that seem reasonable? Any nods from Director Lennox, Director Gisborne?
Well, I got a question for our staff. So yeah, these last bullet points, because there's four. The first one is review the feasibility of the recommended changes to the service establishment bylaw. I think that one is a bit of a cart before the horse. Second one is, seek information from staff regarding the current amount based on current assessed values of the tax rate. And then the third bullet point is the rationale for the funding formula. I believe there's a staff report from 2018 authored by our CAO. If we pass this motion, could the CAO simply just give us that 2018 staff report that has all that information? Because the very last one, which is statistics on relative usage by municipal compared to rural populations, which I don't think our staff has any of that data. The city might have that data, but we hear that they're having some serious staff shortages, so the city might not even have that data. So I don't think it's necessarily appropriate to ask our staff to try and get the stats for the municipality usage of the recreation complex when they might be chasing an empty hole or something like that, because there's no one to necessarily respond. And that's why I think that sure, we can pass this motion, but I would be satisfied to just get a copy of that 2018 staff report that explains, you know, where the funding formula came from. Comes before us, that solves bullet point number 3 and bullet point number 2. And then the staff can just say, hey, this is how much it costs to change the service establishment bylaw. But I think that the most important thing, and this is where it goes back to what Olynyk was saying, what is the problem we're trying to solve? Because right now we're in a motion which is proposing a solution. And I think the problem that we actually want to solve is, what are we doing with the recreation complex? And I think that's something that we all actually want to deal with.
The motion we have in front of us is just requesting information from staff that we don't have. And they will provide it to us. Director Southcott.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Without getting into the discussion, I've been aware of this process since way before the agreement and the bylaw were written. My first involvement was with the ERIS report, which came out and was published in December of 2016. To my knowledge, the only really good numbers in that report are the most substantive numbers, reliable numbers, and that's almost 10 years ago. Well, it's 8 years ago, and so it puts those numbers into some doubt. There was a report produced for City Council by Director Jamie Bretzlaff about a year and a half ago, I believe, that didn't refer directly to that, but did elicit some data that they collect at the front desk. However, that data is way more suspect, or way less reliable, I would believe, than the data even in the ERIS report, because it wasn't collected for the purpose that this consideration needs. So as far as, I just wanted to add this little bit of information from my research. And I'm pretty sure that city staff would not come up with anything more than what I'm itemizing here. So there's really, getting back to the staff insufficiency or the staff challenges up the hill, it may be a while before there is going to be any more information. I think in a preliminary sense, there probably would hesitate to kind of go here, might be worth meeting. But as far as numbers go, I don't believe there's going to be anything more reliable or substantive than what I've just mentioned. And I hope that helps with this discussion. I'm sitting here trying to think, is this really useful, or like, what do we do next? I'm not even sure.
I think we've gone around this a lot. We got to make a call to question on it, but basically this motion is asking staff to give us what information they do have. And I think the 3 members of the recreation service need to have an informal discussion to see where we go from here and how we want to proceed as far as contacting the city. Still think that the motion that we have in front of us is valid, and I'd like to call a question on it now. Okay, one last quick comment.
If it's okay with the other directors, if this motion passes, I would be satisfied with that 2018 report being provided to us, which essentially answers all these questions. If the other directors are happy with that too, I'm seeing a nod from Director Lennox, in which case we can get that information real quick and not take up a bunch of staff time. I'm happy with the 2018 report.
I think it's a good direction to go. If we need more after that, then we can bring it up again. But so yeah. I'm going to call the question on this. All in favor? Okay, unanimous. Question period. Director Gisborne, you have a question.
Yeah, well, it's not a question. Item 15.3, there is another recommendation to our board. The Service Review Group recommends that the board form a negotiating group. I think our board should pass a resolution forming a negotiating group of the sub-regional recreation service participants. We've passed a previous motion asking the city to come and meet with us, the city council. I'm putting forward a motion that we form a negotiating group. There's a second, or I'll speak to it.
Yeah, I'll second that.
Lennox, seconded.
Yeah. I think we should form a negotiating group. I think we can ask our staff for terms of reference once the group is formed, because then the city councilors can come and meet with us. Because as I understand, we've put $240,000 in the budget for the sub-regional recreation service, but the decision was that we wouldn't give the money to the city until we actually met with the city council. So I know that their CAO is missing or taking on other work, but I believe that the council probably wants that money before the end of the year. And I think that would be quite a large carrot to entice the councilors to send over their own group or come over as a group or come over as the whole shebang, or however city council wants to come and play ball with us, because the motion from the finance committee was that we postpone handing the money to the city until after we meet. So this motion is that we form a negotiating group so that we can sit down and talk to each other as, you know, official representatives. And this way we can get moving. That's my thoughts. Let's form the group. Let's get moving. Let's hear what the city council has to say. Do they want us to take on the whole thing, or do they just want our money, or I don't know.
Yeah, I see your hand up, Director Lennox, but I'm just gonna ask a quick question of the CAO. Is it necessary for us to have a group, negotiating group, have official terms of reference for this?
Through the chair, I'm not so certain about the terms of reference. You should get the board approval to have that negotiating group, so you can delegate that authority to negotiate. I believe that was done in the past with the former directors who initiated this, so I don't think that's out of the ordinary.
Did that a negotiating group include any staff member along for the ride to provide information, or should we get it all straight, or is it just strictly the members of the negotiating group that attend?
That's up to the negotiating, up to the service review group. If you recall, staff have not been invited into that. Past, both the CAOs, both the discussions. Ms. Talaman was also there with the sub-regional agreement as well. There's like 3 CAOs and sets of members in the past. Okay, but it's totally up to the sub-regional recreation review group.
Okay, so we don't necessarily need to have the terms of reference. I think that would save us some time and some money, but we could potentially just form the negotiating group. Does that sound reasonable? Director Lennox, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I support the motion for many of the reasons that we've already discussed, and I agree. We don't want to spend too much money, but we do want to make sure that we get the terms of what we're sitting down to talk about nailed down. And you've mentioned Plowman as well, right? So that we make sure that we're having an open negotiation. And really, at that point, it occurs to me that you need staff at the negotiating kind of point in the process, right? I mean, it is an agreement, and it will require staff. So I want to be cognizant of the cost, but also if we're going to meet, we got to get it right. Thanks.
All right, so I'm hearing that you could have a motion to form the negotiating group. Don't really need the terms of reference at this point, but then we have the group, and when we go meet, we invite the CAO to join us as part of that negotiation. Seem reasonable? Okay, so Director Fall.
Just two comments. One comment, I totally, I think the idea of not having, forcing staff or requiring staff to create a terms of reference is a good one, because that can just slow it down. I would suggest that the working group maybe if they, when they meet first, basically endorse, some sort of general terms of reference as per the agreement of the service review group, saying, okay, we're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. And I think that, would be fine. And if support from staff is needed, or if more specific terms are needed, well, then that group can, request it if there's problems. And the only other recommendation or suggestion I have, maybe it's more of a question, is if the motion is just to create a negotiating group, should the motion include, the words that consists of the directors for electoral areas A, B, and C, so it's actually clear after the motion that's actually the people on it, and then that group is now, has the marching orders and going ahead, because otherwise it's just creating this group without any named people other than what's in the report. So just a comment or suggestion or question or something.
Oh, thank you. That's logical. Does that seem reasonable? Okay, so we got our motion, form a working group, directors from areas A, B, and C. I think we're all hashed out here, but Director Gisborne, you have something more to say?
Yeah. When I refer to terms of reference, quote unquote, I'm not talking about like an official, full government document reviewed by legal. I'm referring to the terms of reference that are found in this review document from the notes. They are shall consist of the 3 participants, directors of area A, B, and C, which is part of the motion now. Shall seek consensus on a funding formula prior to meeting with the City of Powell River. Number 3, shall negotiate a new agreement for the sub-regional recreation service with the City of Powell River based on the expired agreement, and shall conclude before the end of 2025. That's essentially what is found in our package here, which is from our service review group. That's essentially what I consider to be our terms of reference. It's laid out for us. We don't need to send a whole bunch of paperwork to our staff to make them feel important. I think we don't need to do that. This is our terms of reference. It's right in front of us. I'm happy with that. Let's get moving.
All right, I'm gonna call the question. All in favor? All right, unanimous, done. Question period.
Hello, Chair Galinsky from the Peak here. I don't have any questions this afternoon. Thanks for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. Okay, somebody like to read the proposed closed session motion? Go ahead.
I move that the board move in camera at the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under section 91C, labor relations or other employer relations. E, the acquisition, disposition, or expropriation of land or improvements if the board considers that disclosure could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the regional district. K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a regional district service that are at their preliminary stages, and that, in the view of the board, could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the regional district if they were held in public. L, discussions with regional district officers and employees respecting regional district objectives, measures, and progress reports for the purposes of preparing an annual report under section 98, annual regional district report, and end the consideration of whether a board meeting should be closed under provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
Goodbye. Thanks, thank you. Any discussion? None, all in favor? We're going in camera.
The recording has started. You can.
Recording in progress.
Okay, we are back from our in-camera session. The board would like to rise and report on the following. The board has endorsed the Shelter Point Regional Park and the Clahaman Lund Gazebo Regional Park location for an EV charging station and directed staff to enter into an agreement for 100% funding of the charging station through the Aviva /Earth Day Canada Charged for Change program. And the Board referred the first quarter 2025 strategic plan progress report to the May open committee of the whole meeting. With that, we are at the end of our agenda and we are adjourned. Thanks for joining us.
Bye, everybody.
See y'all
Yeah.
tomorrow.
Everybody.
And everyone.